Good morning. Today we look at Judges 16 through 18. And yesterday, the chapters we looked at talked a lot about Samson and how he was strong and successful against the Philistines. And they were watching him, trying to figure out a way to get rid of him. Of course, I mean, he was a warrior, a judge for the Israelites and coming against these Philistines. And one night, as he had spent time with a prostitute, it says they were watching him and waiting till morning, but he didn't wait till morning to get up. He left at midnight and escaped. And then verse 4, he meets a woman, Delilah, and a Philistine woman, and falls in love with her, the Bible tells us. And Samson and Delilah is a story that, is somewhat familiar. And the Philistines come to her, and because she is one of them, you need to help us figure out a way to get rid of this guy. He is, and so again yesterday, as I mentioned, that love doesn't test other people. You don't test somebody's love. Well, here she does, and she says to him, what makes you so strong? And how can you be bound so that someone could subdue you? I mean, not very subtle in that, What can we do to subdue you? And he tells her a story. Wrong. Time he was 7 bowstrings, Well, the next, as they come, he snaps them. And then she cries to him, and you didn't tell me the truth, tell me now, So he says, well, bind me with 7 new ropes. And of course, that one doesn't work either. And then the third time, again, she's, what's your strength? It's just, you've lied to me. Don't you love me? Don't you love me? And, if you love me, you will, and when we hear that line, if someone says that to us, it's just kind of a, that's the kind of test that shouldn't be done. Um, we don't put that caveat on somebody anyway. So, he says, if you tie my braids up tight, and then I'll be, and of course, that's a lie again for the third time on Samson's part. And then, it says verse 16, finally, after she had nagged him with her words day after day and pestered him, he was tired to death. So he told her the whole secret. And I thought about that, nagging, and, day after day. And things come back to me as, being a kid, and wanting something. And nagging mom and dad and, back and forth and, not just one, but both, and, hoping that, they finally give in, and most of the time, of course, it didn't end up as good as a person thought either. But, Samson finally gave in and told her the truth. Shaved my head. I'm a Nazarite. I've never had a razor to my hair since the day I was born. And so he falls asleep with his head on her lap, and she calls people and they shave his head, and his strength is gone. He gets up and he figured, as he gets up, he assumes that he'll have his strength, and he doesn't. And they subdue him, and they blind him, they poke his eye. I mean, it's just a gruesome story. And they're going to sacrifice to their gods, and so they tie him up, and he has to be tied to the main pillar so that I can feel him. And we know the story here too, as to he prays and asks God for one more time of strength, one more time of God's favor, so that as he himself dies in the rubble of this collapsed area, all of those, I mean, it says there were 3,000 up on the roof. I mean, it's big area, huge, and God gives him the strength, and everything collapses. And, it says that he killed more as he died. And then his brothers come and buried him in the tomb. And he had judged Israel 20 years, it says. So the story of Samson, this man who had been spoken for, chosen by God from before birth, served God, and was done in by treachery. And this is a perfect picture of Satan, treachery, never giving in, never giving up, no matter how many times we say no, Satan is still there tempting, if you, and when we finally give in, it's not good. but God is always there. And so when we return to God, I mean, this is a part of the story for me too. When we come back to God and say to God, I messed up, give me strength, help me get on the right track again. We see that in this story of Samson and Delilah. The treachery of Satan, the fall, the giving in to the temptation, being just totally worn out by the situation, but the faithfulness of God. I mean, I truly look at that story as, so sad in so many ways, but yet the faithfulness of God is there. Chapter 17 and 18 are, there was now no king. There was no king yet, in Israel. And there was a man in the hill country of Ephraim whose name was Micah, who had stolen this money from his mother. And he says, Mom, I got your money. I got your 1,100 pieces of silver. I'm going to give it back to you. So he gives it back. And she uses 200 of them to make up an idol to be in their house to worship. And whoops, hey, that's not the right thing to do, is it? But she makes an idol. She cast it, and it was in the house. And he made a shrine. And it says he made an ephod, a fancy garment. And he made teraphim, which are, divining equipment, things of, false things of worship anyway. And he installed one of his sons as the priest. And again, it says, in those days there was no king. And all the people, this is the line that I love. All the people did what was right in their own eyes, or in their own minds. And I think about that in today's situation too, if I feel like, if it's okay for me, I can just do it, and I can do what I want to do. And they all did what was right in their eyes. And totally picked pure picture of today. So many people with their entitlements today, and feeling that, doesn't matter what other people think, this is what I'm going to do. And I know better for me. It's okay for me, And again, I mean, that's not what God would say. Love your neighbor as yourself, Treat others well, be a servant, And it doesn't say, do everything you want to do for yourself. It's just like that nagging kid, coming to mom and dad day after day and night after night, But anyway, they did what was right in their own eyes. What a sad, sad statement. And there was a young man, it says then, of Bethlehem in Judah. This is a different Bethlehem than the one in, in Nazareth where Jesus was born. And he sets out on a journey and comes to Micah's house. And Micah says, what are you doing, And, well, I'm just traveling looking for a place. Well, stay here and be my priest. I'll pay you 10 somethings a year, and food and clothing and a place to stay. And so he does. He becomes priest here for Micah, and worshiping this idol, of course, and everything there. And then the last verse of chapter 17. Now I know the Lord will prosper me, because the Levite has become my priest. My priest. And I mean, we talk about, I know people call me, they'll say, well, my pastor. Well, but I'm not just their personal pastor, but he had his own priest, so surely now God will favor me. And during this time, the Danites, the tribe of Dan, they're need a place to live. They need a place. So and again, chapter 18 starts with that. There's no king in Israel. And so the Danites send 5 spies, and they come to Micah and see Micah and talk with him and see the priest, and all familiar with everything there. And they go and they spy out this other land, a peaceful land, a land of milk and honey, and a land that's, these people that live there are content. They've got everything. They're prosperous, but, they're not affiliated with the others around. And so they go back to their tribe, and they come with their soldiers and with everything. And what do? On their way, they steal Micah's statue. They steal Micah's priest. Wouldn't it be better to be a priest of a whole tribe than just a single man, Temptation again, And of course the priest goes with, and the Danites go, and Micah finds out what happened, and he comes and approaches him, and well, of course, he can't do anything against such a large number, so he goes home. But the Danites tribe goes and they wage a successful battle against these people in this land, and they take the land and they rebuild the city after they've captured it and killed the people there, and establish a new place to live and to dwell. And it says, verse 30, they set the idol up for themselves. Jonathan, son of Gershom, and his sons were priests to the Danites until the time of the land went into captivity. So we have a foretelling right here, until the land goes into captivity. You know, here is this tribe of Israel worshiping a false idol, a little idol made of silver rather than God himself.